Hello, and welcome to the Ink and Paint Club podcast. If you're one of our regulars, welcome back. If you're new to our show, thanks for stopping by. Last year, we spent Halloween telling spooky stories about some of our favorite cartoons and kids programming. And this year, we're doing it all again. Some of these stories you might have heard before, maybe some you haven't. Regardless, I hope you enjoy our second installment of cartoon Creepypastas. Lock the doors, get comfy, and hit the lights.
I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, I'm prepared to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for about a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. Wasn't paid, of course, most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would go crazy over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it without giving you too many unnecessary details, but they had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat, sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Okay, so me and two other interns were in the editing room, along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received the copy that was supposed to be, I think it was Fear of a Krabby Patty, and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it isn't final yet, animators often put up a mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, oftentimes lewd titles like, How Sex Doesn't Work, instead of Rockabye Bivalve. That episode where SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop? It's nothing particularly funny, but it's just work-related chuckles. So when we saw the title card, Squidward's Suicide, well, we didn't think it more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it, and, well, the happy-go-lucky music, it plays as normal. The story begins with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting, a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. And this is when things begin to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound is synced up with the animation, so yeah, that's not common at all. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There's a slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. It's not normal funny cartoon booing, that's common in cartoons, but you could very clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and he looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in center frame, and he too is booing, very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing, though. What is odd is everyone had hyper-realistic eyes. Very detailed. They're clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but it's something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red, and some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. The shot goes to Squidward, sitting on the edge of his bed. He's looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is of the night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part, though, was that there was no sound. Literally no sound. Not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It's almost as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. And he just sat there, blinking, in that silence for about 30 seconds, maybe. And then he started to sob softly. He put his tentacles over his eyes, and he cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while, a sound in the background very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest or something like that, but the screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at the shots 10 seconds apart, side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen twitches a bit, as if it's like twisting in on itself for a split second, but then everything goes back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is the sound, and Squidward's, sobbing sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were like holes the sound was coming through from the other side. As good as the studio likes to have, they definitely don't purchase the equipment to be that good, to produce sound of that quality. Below the sound of the wind and sobbing, it's very faint, but it sounded like laughter, like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. You watched this show at least twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I definitely had time to think about them. So after 30 seconds again of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame had been replaced. The lead animation editor paused. He rewound, frame by frame. And what we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. It couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied, one eye dangling over his upturned face, popped naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open, entrails lying beside him. I think he was laying on some pavement, probably a road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, nothing, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but we pressed on, hoping it was some sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing louder than before, and half body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it, the blood would get on your fingers. The wind sounded as if it were that of a gale, blowing through the forest. There was even snapping sounds of branches. Oh God, I'm laughing. It was deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was, of course, reluctant to go back. All were. But we knew we had to. This time the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye, too, popped out and popped, naked except for underpants. Her entrails piled all on top of her, above another crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street, and the photographer's shadow, clearly visible, very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit. Gotten one intern, only female, ran out. Show resumed. Of course it did. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were done, in hyperrealism like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer, watching us. And after about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. Oh God, the sound was piercing and loud. And most fear-inducing of all, his sobs were mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back. And so did the deep voice laughing, and this time the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames at least. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy. About the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out from a stomach wound by a large hand. The right eye popped and dangling, blood trickling down it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. He went on the next. Same thing. He went back to the first. Played them quicker, and oh god, I vomited all over the floor. The animating sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They were played as if they were sequential frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift off the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. We had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes, confused as to why he was called down there. So the editor just continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound, again, stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame of the face, for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out, and that deep voice said, "Do it!" And we see Squidward's hand, a shotgun in his hands. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters on the wall behind him. On his bed, he flies back from the force. The last 5 seconds of the episode show his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the heck was going on. Most people left the room at that point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. God damn it, I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was that the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called in to analyze what had happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have, glitched and showed the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No children's scene was identified, no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now that I have seen something happen, and can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things.
So, do any of you remember those Mickey Mouse cartoons from the 1930s? The ones that were just put on a DVD a few years ago? Well, I hear that there is one that was unreleased to even the most avid classic Disney fan. According to sources, it's nothing special. It's just a continuous loop like Flintstones of Mickey Mouse walking past 6 buildings that goes on for 2 to 3 minutes before fading out. Unlike the cutesy tunes put in it though, the song on the cartoon was not a song at all, just a constant banging on the piano for a minute and a half before going to a white noise for the remainder of the film. It wasn't the jolly old Mickey we've come to love either. Mickey wasn't dancing, not even smiling, just kind of walking as if you and I were walking, with a normal facial expression. But for some reason, his head tilted side to side as he kept this dismal look. Up until a year or 2 ago, everyone believed that after it cut to black, that was it. When Leonard Maltin was reviewing the cartoon to be put into the complete series, he decided it was too junk to be on the DVD, but wanted to have a digital copy due to the fact that it was a creation of Walt. When he had a digitized version up on his computer to look at the file, he noticed something. The cartoon was actually 9 minutes and 4 seconds long. This is what my source emailed to me in full. He is a personal assistant of one of the higher executives at Disney, an acquaintance of Mr. Moulton himself. After it cut to black, it stayed like that until the 6th minute before going back into Mickey walking. The sound was different this time. It was a murmur. It wasn't a language, but more like a gurgled cry. As the noise got more indistinguishable and loud over the next minute, the picture began to get weird. The sidewalk started to go in directions that seemed impossible based on the physics of Mickey walking, and the dismal face of the mouse was slowly curling into a smirk. On the 7th minute, the murmur continued into a blood-curdling scream, the kind of scream that was painful to hear, and the picture was getting more obscure. Colors were happening that shouldn't have been possible at the time. Mickey's face began to fall apart, his eyes rolled to the bottom of his chin, like 2 marbles in a fishbowl, and his curled smile was pointing upward to the left side of his face. The buildings became rubble, floating down in midair, and the sidewalk was so impossible navigating into warped directions, a few seemingly inconceivable with what we as humans know about direction. Mr. Moulton got disturbed and left the room, sending an employee to finish the video to take notes of everything happening up until the last second, and afterwards immediately stowed a disc of the cartoon into the vault. This distorted screaming lasted until 8 minutes and a few seconds in, and then it abruptly cuts to Mickey's mouse face at the credits of the end of every video with what sounded like a broken music box playing in the background. This happened for about 30 seconds, and whatever was in the remaining 30 seconds I haven't been able to get a sliver of information about. From a security guard working under me who was making rounds outside that room, I was told that after the last frame the employee stumbled out of the room with pale skin saying, "Real suffering is not known," 7 times before speedily taking the guard's pistol and offing himself on the spot. The thing I couldn't get out of Leonard Moulton was that the last frame was a piece of Russian text that roughly said, "The sights of hell bring its viewers back in." As far as I know, no one else has seen it, but there have been dozens of attempts at getting the file on rapid share by employees inside the studio, all of whom have been promptly terminated of their jobs. Whether it got online or not, it's up for debate, but if rumors serve me right, it's online somewhere under Suicidemouse.avi. If you ever find a copy of the film, I want you to never view it, and to contact me by phone immediately, regardless of the time. When a Disney death is covered, as well as this, it means it has to be something huge. Get back to me. I've yet to find a copy of this, but it's out there. I know it.
So, most viewers are unaware that there was a 7th team to the true original pilot episode of Legends of the Hidden Temple. And the Yellow Frogs were the 7th team. The team featured like a golden yellow t-shirt with a dark green frog for its iconic symbol, and that made the team stand out as the other teams had like a yellow logo on their colored shirt. This pilot episode was never shown on air, and only an unedited version of the tape exists. This is due to the horrific and unexplainable accident that took place on set. Only a handful of people have ever seen the tape, and there was no audience at the time since it was, just a pilot. The episode was called The Skull of Akama Pitchley. The featured artifact was the skull of the first leader of the Aztec people. It had made its way into the Hidden Temple by unknown means, and it was placed on the throne room on the chair. The teams ran through like the various obstacles, the moat, the Steps of Knowledge, and the temple games, but the Yellow Frogs were like a powerhouse and were able to complete all the challenges first. However, there were several strange mishaps along the way. The moat was a fairly simple first challenge. Both players had to cross the moat by walking on a rope bridge with a rope above that they could hold on to for support. The moat would also have a flow of water that made them similar to rapids, which made it hard to cross since it would knock the players off. Everything had gone well for the first member of the team, crossing it with little trouble. But as soon as the Yellow Frog's second member stepped on the rope, the water turned dark red and began to heat up. The small rapids became very strong, started rocking the rope harder and harder, trying to knock the runners off. Splashes from the red water that touched one of the runner's skin would start to burn. Some of the runners got scared and turned back, while 4 of the teams continued on, unaware that this wasn't part of the game. The Yellow Frogs were one of the 4 that made it across. As soon as the last team crossed, the moat returned to its normal color and temperature. The staff ruled that the machine that controlled the water was tampered with, but video surveillance didn't show anyone around the machine. Next was the steps of knowledge. The burns weren't that bad, and thanks to the waivers that the parents had signed, they couldn't be held reliable for any physical damages to the kids. So the producers decided to carry on. At the steps of knowledge, the teens were provided a story about the skull by Olmec, just as any other episode of the show. At first, Olmec was acting normal while telling the tale of Akama Petree. However, when Olmec spoke of his great leader's name, the big stone-faced statue would slowly power off with his mouth wide open, speaking in a lower tone that sounded demonic. They'd have a few staff members run over to check the malfunction and have to restart Olmec. After the third time the stone face spoke his name and his mouth opened wide, a large group of Cyclocosima spiders came sprinting out of the mouth and began to attack the nearby staff. After attacking the staff, they all ran to the nearby moat and drowned themselves. Some of the staff that were bitten were rushed to the hospital to receive medical treatment. As the runners were not attacked by the spiders and the producers didn't care about the staff, they decided to proceed with the game. The remaining staff members were able to get Olmec turned back on and continue the story. As Olmec finished the story, his huge red eyes began to cry the same red water that had been in the moat. Right as he spoke the last word of his story, his eyes burst into flames. The staff ran over to put the flames out and investigate the red water. It looked and smelled exactly like blood. They couldn't come up with an explanation except that this was a prank by one of the staff members, maybe a disgruntled member that wasn't being paid enough. The yellow frogs and the silver snakes were the teams to reach the bottom of the steps and move on. The temple games were about the same as any of the other episodes, physical obstacles that related to the artifact of the episode. Nothing out of the ordinary happened in the actual games, but there was something eerie in the air. Random sounds started to come from the temple, such as birds chirping and frogs croaking. One of the children thought they had saw something moving around in the temple, but they could only make out a shadow of a person. The temple had already been set up for the temple run, so all the remaining staff were out front helping, and there should have been no one inside the temple. The host sent in a few staff members to take a look just to make sure it wasn't some staff member or one of the children who got lost running around, but all they could find were that all the doors were open that had originally been shut. The Yellow Frogs had won the second and third temple games, making them the winners. They were only awarded 2 half pieces of the Pendant of Life, unlike later episodes that would give a full one for winning the third game. This would mean that the second runner would have no Pendant of Life going to the temple, and if they were caught, it would be game over instantly, without a way to protect themselves. It was time for the Yellow Frogs to run the temple. At first, the children were afraid to continue on after all the evil and disturbing events that had happened. The producers came onto the set and reassured that these events were just pranks by crazy staff members, and that they had caught them and there'd be no harm done to them. The children still refused, and so the producers offered an additional $1,000 prize just for entering the temple. This was enough to make the children enter. Too much money had been spent on creating the show, and they had to make sure this pilot was completed. The first to enter was a girl. The host gave her the spiel about entering the temple, as well as the prize information for retrieving the skull, which was a trip to space camp. She was given her only Pendant of Life and began her run. She made her way up the stairs and entered the room with the 3 gargoyles, and was immediately met by a temple guard, and was forced to give up her pendant. She continued on and was doing fairly well until she entered the Shrine of the Silver Monkey. As she began to grab the pieces to make the silver monkey, a temple guard appeared from the door. This temple guard was dressed differently from the first one, though. Instead of its iconic feather hat, it wore a large skull with horns and covered in blood. The temple guard quickly grabbed the girl and she was pulled through the door, slamming it as she went through. It happened so quick it was like a blur on the video. Right as the door shut, you could hear a blood-curdling scream, but it was mostly masked by the music. The boy entered and began to run through the temple the same way the girl did. The boy navigated the temple until he reached the throne room and grabbed the skull. This should have unlocked all the doors and made the remaining temple guards vanish. Instead, all the doors in the temple suddenly shut and locked. A temple guard entered from the back doors, also wearing a skull with giant curled horns and blood all over. This temple guard, however, held a giant green stone knife and was slowly advancing toward the boy. He suddenly screamed with rage, shouting words that no one understood. He attacked the boy with his giant knife, but the boy ran through the back doors and the guard chased after. So, as soon as they went through, the doors slammed together and another blood-curdling scream was heard. The host ran to the back of the temple and feared that the children were hurt while the staff called the police. When the host arrived with one of the members of the camera crew, All they found were 2 sets of human bones and skulls to match. Both were wearing the Yellow Frog shirt. The artifact was nowhere to be found, and there was no place for anyone to hide back there. The temple guards had also vanished. The police showed up to investigate the scene. They'd figured it had to be some sort of hoax or the type of prank from the children and staff, because even if the children were murdered, they would not suddenly turn into bones. It was obviously a setup. They took the bones to a forensic analyst and began to search the studios for the children to arrest them. The analysts who investigated the bones were able to determine that they were real human bones, and they all matched. Police still believe it to be a prank, but they refuse to give out any additional information to the public. The missing children still haven't been found to this day. In order to keep this from the media, the show's producers had to pay off everyone to keep quiet, including the parents. They also retired the Yellow Frogs team by burning the shirts as evidence so that no one would ever find out about the events that happened. Some say that the skull was the true skull of Akama Petree, and that by bringing it into the temple, it had made the temple cursed. Some say the temple guards that took the children were real Aztec guards whose job was to protect the remains of the great ruler, and could not return to the spirit world until they had the revenge on the thieves who stole the skull. Some say the missing children were offered as sacrifices by those guards so they may rest in peace.
I have to admit, I've always been a big fan of Jonathan Crane, aka the Scarecrow in Batman's universe. It's a fascinating character with a twisted personality, and he always was my favorite rogue in BTAS. So when my best friend told me there was a lost episode in which Jonathan was changed back into a kid, I was like, hell yeah, just give me the DVD! And she did. Thinking about it, I guess I should have been wary. My best friend was never fond of Batman. Indeed, she had always thought my sick passion for this cartoon was kind of weird. But at the moment, I was just too happy to be suspicious, and when she gave me the DVD, I could only think about one thing: watching it as soon as I could. I got home earlier than usual that day. One of my teachers was sick, and I left school in a hurry, eager to watch that lost episode. I put the DVD in the drive, and I sat on the couch with a bowl of soda crackers. Everything started normally. Batman was chasing the Scarecrow down Gotham streets, with Robin, of course. Jonathan ran into a dark alley and hid beside a dumpster, looking tired and sick. He was paler and skinnier than usual, with cold sweat all over his face, and I immediately thought that he might have been drugged or something like that. The camera got back to Batman, who was still looking for the villain, looking very worried. "Have you found him yet?" asked Robin. "He can't have gone too far. Dr. Bartholomew said he was weaker than a kitten when he escaped." "That's what I'm afraid of, Robin. A weak and tired Scarecrow is a very dangerous Scarecrow." "But we're here to help him. For goodness sake, Batman, it's not like we're gonna hurt him." "I'm fully aware of that, but the man isn't. Remember, he's sick." I don't know why, but I began to feel very uncomfortable here. Batman was usually very calm, very confident, and at this moment, well, let's say it clearly, he seemed scared. Very scared. Of what I didn't know, but I wasn't so sure I wanted to know. A part of me wanted to turn off the TV, but the other part of my brain was like, no, don't! Jonathan is in trouble! That'll be nice, to see Batman helping him for once. So I just sat there, unable to get my eyes off the screen. The camera got back to Jonathan, who was now sitting on the floor. His heartbeat was literally deafening, and he seemed in great pain. That's when things started to go wrong. The Scarecrow screamed. A scream so shrill and so loud that I literally jumped down from the couch out of pure fright. He spat blood, a lot of blood, and his body started to convulse. His eyes were so bloody red, and his face... oh God, his face was paler than a ghost. I swear to God I wanted to turn off the TV. I never so much wanted to turn off that damn TV, but it was like I was paralyzed by fear. I could just look at that damn screen, wondering what was going on, and I was just thinking, what the hell is this? Then it all ended. Jonathan stopped moving. It was like he had just died there, in this dark alley. His screams alerted the dynamic duo. Batman and Robin arrived on the scene within seconds, and the look they had on their faces was pure terror. The camera slowly turned back to Jonathan, or at least what was left of him. There was a pile of bloody clothes, and sitting under the rags you could see a red-haired kid who looked very terrified. He looked at Batman and Robin with tear-filled eyes. "Professor Crane?" asked Robin carefully. Do you recognize us?" The kid remained silent for a while as he got up on his feet. His face was all covered in blood, but that didn't seem to bother him. "Dimwits," he said, smiling. Batman and Robin looked at each other with relief, and I have to say that I was quite happy to see that Jonathan Crane was still himself. I sat back on the couch. Now I knew why that episode was never aired. It would have been far too scary for kids. Batman caught the kid in his arms and wrapped him up in his cape. Jonathan didn't even fight back. He seemed pretty sleepy, and I thought that he was maybe very happy to be safe. They brought him back to Arkham, explaining the situation to Dr. Bartholomew. At this point of the episode, I was like a kid in front of a Christmas tree. Now that everything was back to normal, I knew that I was going to enjoy this ep. The 5 following minutes were rather annoying, in my opinion. It was all about Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn and their damn maternal instinct. "And I want to cuddle you, and I want to read you a goodnight story," and so on. Boring! But after the horrifying scenes I had seen, I wasn't going to complain. Nope, sir! The time passed by rather quickly, and Jonathan was still stuck in a kid's body. Things weren't so fun for him anymore. The other inmates were tired of having to take care of him, and the doctors were treating him like a toddler. One night, Batman came to the asylum to see if everything was okay. He found Jonathan sitting on his bed, looking very depressed and lonely. "How do you feel, Professor?" the Cape Crusader asked. "Dr. Bartholomew told me that you were quite morose." "Who wouldn't be? I hate being a child. I shouldn't have experimented this new toxin on myself. Look at me. I'm a freak." I was waiting for a comforting speech from Batman, but he wasn't there anymore. Instead, there was a note on Jonathan's door. "Hang yourself." I felt a shiver down my spine. Who could have written such a horrible note? Batman? No, that was insane. Jonathan looked at the piece of paper for a moment. He didn't seem sad, no, just tired, exhausted. The screen went black. The next morning, a nurse came in all the inmates' cells to see if everything was okay. She entered Jonathan's cell. There was a moment of silence, and she ran away, screaming as if she had seen the most horrible thing ever. The camera entered the cell, very slowly. No music, just the sound of a loud, very loud heartbeat. And there he was, grown up again, his face twisted into a horrifying expression of pain, a noose around his neck. Jonathan. I screamed. And I think I'll never stop screaming.
I've always loved Cartoon Network. When I was growing up, it was one of my favorite channels to watch. Even today, it has some good shows like Adventure Time and Regular Show. One of the newest shows on the network is some cartoon called The Amazing World of Gumball. It's cute and mildly entertaining. It's not exactly my cup of tea, since it's a little immature, but my little brother seems to like it a lot. Now, one day I was watching Adult Swim when I realized I'd been up so late that I hadn't even kept track of the time. It was already like 4 a.m. I don't recall ever watching that channel that late, so I stayed awake to see what would happen when it ended. A little bumper showed up at the bottom of the screen during a commercial break, and it said that there was a special episode of The Amazing World of Gumball that was about to come on. That kind of confused me. Since the show was very popular and also very new, why would it be coming on this early in the morning? But I was bored, and thought, what the hell, I might as well watch it. And besides, maybe I could use it later to spoil my brother. Sort of mean, I know, but what are you gonna do? Flashy and energetic intro theme played, although it was played a little differently than I recall. The music was a little different, and the show's logo wasn't even animated. It's colors were done rather sloppily as well, almost like something a little kid would do on a doodle board or a glow board. I ignored it. I assumed that it had something to do for it being a special episode. The title of the episode was called The Grieving. Sort of sad title, but I didn't really pay too much attention. It began with Gumball, the show's 12-year-old protagonist, standing alone, facing a corner of his dimly lit classroom. He looked absolutely miserable, a far cry from the cheerful demeanor he usually had. There was no one else in the room. Not even his best friend and adopted brother Darwin the goldfish. The window in the room clearly showed the night sky outside. I was really starting to get confused. Why would he be at school at night? And why was he standing in the corner all sad and alone? After about what seemed like a minute of Gumball just standing there somberly in the corner, the scene then just suddenly changed. We were in Gumball's house. Once again, the scene is silent. It's a little disquieting. Richard, Gumball's enormous rabbit father, walks in from the kitchen, and he looks even more miserable than Gumball had in the previous scene. Richard isn't even wearing his usual attire. He's dressed in a fancy black suit. A little uncharacteristic of him, as he's usually a slob. He sighs and slumps back down onto the sofa and starts sobbing intensely, sounding like someone who had just lost something important. I was starting to get a little creeped out. There was the silly fun cartoon that I usually look forward to watching with my younger brother. This was something completely different. I was beginning to think that this might have something that the creators did as an experiment or something, like a test animation or sound perhaps. Oh, it couldn't have been. Aside from the opening theme, which was still different from the final shows, the episode had been much quieter than it usually was, only subtle sounds and very little music. And the animation was not anything to write home about either. It was done a bit like a amateur Flash on Newgrounds, or character designs were somewhat sloppy and rushed looking, and the real-life backgrounds used for the show looked, even those were different. As confused and somewhat frightening as I was, for some reason I kept watching it. Poor Richard was still sobbing on the sofa as the front door opened suddenly, making me jump a bit at such a loud noise. Gumball's mother, Nicole, a blue cat like him, stepped in. Like Richard, she wasn't wearing her usual outfit. For some reason, she was in a black dress and was wearing a pretty black hat to match. Nicole sat on the couch and tried to comfort her husband, although she was looking a bit saddened herself. By the time Richard's crying, it began to get more pained and miserable sounding. This wasn't the normal cartoon crying on the show. This was realistic and almost depressing crying. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the sad scene at their home ended, and it shifted back to the school. We weren't in Gumball's classroom this time. We were in Principal Brown's office. Nicole and Richard were there, in their usual clothes, looking more normal and happy than they had before, but still slightly worried. Principal Brown, however, looked extremely sad. He quietly and somberly informed them that their children, NIE and Darwin, were not present after lunch earlier that day. They hadn't been seen at all the rest of the day. Nicole was instantly furious at him. She began spouting various fucks and calling at him that I don't think would have made it on a more mature program like a regular show. Of course, I was just laughing at this because it seemed sort of funny for Nicole to flip out in this manner and start swearing like a sailor in a G-rated cartoon. But my outlook soon changed when Principal Brown told her something else after she finally had quieted down. His eyes began to tear up as he informed them that they eventually were found, but they had not been found alive. He then went into graphic and nearly nauseating detail describing how their bodies were found, their parents sitting in just utter shock. I could hardly believe what was happening. How could such a cheery and fun kids show be taking such a very vastly dark and twisted turn? So I was considering turning the television off, but I was too scared to be left in the dark by now. Nearly frozen by fear and disturbed intensely at the terrible things that he was saying. Another flashback. The scene was earlier that day, and the animation in this scene was even worse than earlier. I don't remember it very clearly, but I think he began his recollection by saying that the school had called the police when they first turned up missing. believing that the kids had simply just ran off and decided to skip. And then they said it was very uncharacteristic of them to go skipping school like delinquents. Darwin was a little naive and a bit ditzy, but he was a good kid and wouldn't have even dreamed of doing something like that. And Annie was even less likely to run away. She was a straight-A student, despite being only 4, which also troubled the police. The school had been thoroughly checked, so the police started to search the heavily wooded area outside the school. It took a little time for the police to discover the horrifying fate of Annie. In a small clearing outside of the school, Annie's head was found in a small box. You likely wouldn't have expected something like that to be shown in the show's cutesy art style, but it was nothing like that at all. Realistic blood covered the box inside and out, while Annie's head was done in the normal style, but was drenched in red and some other fluids. Not all of them hers, apparently. There was a note in the box, seemingly written in her blood. It was never stated during the episode what exactly was written on the note, but it apparently led to the rest of her remains, Darwin's heavily mutilated corpse. What I remember most about this scene is how out of place it seemed. All the blood and gore from Darwin and Annie's slaughtered and dismembered remains was done in such a realistic and disturbing way. I mean, it looked like the scene had been taken straight out from a crime scene photograph, not by a professional, not something from a cartoon. The way the scene was animated was different from most of the show as well. I mean, you may know the characters from this series are done in vastly different animation styles from Flash to CGI, but this scene wasn't like anything I had ever seen on the show. Every little detail on Darwin's face was clearly illustrated. It looked like a zombie. His face was pale and his eyes had been gouged out by someone. Annie fared no better, or what was left of her anyway. She was naked, and her stomach had been slit open. Her intestines were strewn around the trees and bushes in the woods. Once again in a very morbid and realistic style. I was feeling very ill by the time this incredibly disturbing flashback had come to an end, so I quickly ran to the bathroom to vomit. After that, I noticed that the show had been running twice as long. It's usually only 11 minutes, but this time it ran for about 30. I was wondering if there was anything about this episode at all somewhere online, so I started looking it up on Google, but nothing came up, no information, nothing even remotely similar to the plot, and nothing existed about it at all. Now incredibly scared and wondering if anyone else was watching, I called my brother and asked him to turn it on and see if he was seeing the same thing that I was. Sure, he was pretty mad that I woke him up, but I thanked him and just asked him to stay on the line just to check it for me. And the scene had panned out for the horrific sight. It was the same thing I was seeing, but I asked my brother if he saw some cartoon animals talking or crying, but he said there was nothing there. It was just some old rerun of Looney Tunes playing. In utter shock, I dropped the phone and ran over to the TV to turn it off. Tried every single button and nothing would work. I mean, the damn thing would just keep playing that frickin' episode over and over. Eventually turned off when I ripped the cord out from the wall. My brother hung up, figuring I was playing some weird, disgusting joke on him. Not sure exactly what happened after that. Eventually, though, curiosity got the better of me. I had to at least find out what the hell was going on with this episode, how it was going to end. I apparently didn't miss too much after I shut the TV off. Gumball's parents were still talking to Principal Brown, but not that much by now. Nicole was asking if Gumball was alright. Apparently, since she hadn't remembered when Principal Brown told her exactly what had happened to Darwin and Annie. He looked slightly confused and shocked for a moment, and explained to her that he thought Gumball was out sick today, and he had spent the day at home by himself with a stomach bug. Nicole screamed and wailed, and Richard quietly told him in a very out-of-character voice that They thought Gumball had got on the bus this morning. It didn't seem that way. The police were called at once again to search the building and the small forest outside the school. They found him in Miss Simeon's classroom, hanging by a noose, with a blood-covered knife behind him, blood covering his clothing. The episode ended with a shot of Gumball's dead body just hanging there in the corner, fading to black. The credits rolled silently, like the usual way Cartoon Network annoyingly airs a promo that squishes half the screen. The credits just rolled on. Plain white text, a pure black background. Eventually the episode ended. But the name stuck out though. The writer's name, Ben Bakwe. Said that he was the creator of the show and the rest of the people I'd never heard of, and the copyright even said something that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Said it was from 2001. Which is odd, seeing as the show was new for 2011, but after all that was over, the screen went to static for a split second, during which some weird, creepy and shocking video clips began to show between the intervals of the static. The first one was some weird man in a plague doctor outfit, standing there with the lights flashing black and red. The next was played real quickly, but it was over and over a kitten's face being squished by a woman's wearing high heels. The last one was the one that disturbed me the most. It was my brother, or at least a kid that looked like my brother, being shot in the face. You could even see what was blood spatter and brains being shot onto the wall. I couldn't handle much after that. A couple of nights went by. I couldn't exactly sleep. I didn't really even tell my parents about it either. I was too freaked out they'd think I'd be just crazy or something, that I'd thought it up, that it was imaginary. I know it wasn't imaginary. It wasn't fake. It was real. I saw it. Eventually I discovered that the creator of the show, Ben, he had a Twitter account, so I sent him a message, asking about it, about this episode called The Grieving. And this is what he sent back. One thing, how in the heck did you find that? I never, ever, ever thought I would think about that old shame again. Don't tell anyone this. But the amazing world of Gumball goes back further than you know. I used to have a really boring job as a teen, and I sketched little things of the Wattersons and friends. The episode you saw was never supposed to be seen by anyone but me and a few friends of mine. It was a very awful thing to do, but we made the episode as a joke. A guy from my old job, who everyone hated, had lost a child to some crazed serial killer who is apparently still out there somewhere. We made it so we could make fun of how he came into work usually, crying like a fool, which is why you saw Mr. and Mrs. Watterson cry so much in that episode. I know, I am deeply sorry for what I did, which is why I tried to bury that stupid thing years ago. Hell, we went out into the countryside with my friends and dug a hole and buried the clips of it. What I don't get, though, is how you describe the blood and the guts and stuff. I mean, we didn't have any scene with their bodies being found. I mean, all that happens in the episode is the parents are informed that the kids are found dead with them crying. We never really drew anything in the episode like that at all. I mean, we're not that sick. I mean, now this is my theory. I mean, the lunatic who killed the man's child. And I may have found the tape that we had buried, watched it, edited it, and then maybe he hijacked the local TV station somehow and got the episode to air on, your local station. Now, why your brother couldn't see it, I have no idea. Why it seems you're the only one who saw it, I have no idea either. Look, I'm sorry, I really am. But me and my friends, we're the only ones who made those scenes with Richard and Nicole crying. That's it. So, I'm sorry you had to whatever happened to you. So, best wishes, Ben, and everyone else involved in the grieving. Seriously, Ben? To anyone else out there who's listening, stay the fuck away from that episode.
Depending on who you are, you may or may not know of the cartoon show entitled Regular Show. It is known to push the envelope But here was one episode that Cartoon Network thought was just going too far. I, an intern for Cartoon Network Studios, found the tape of the rejected episode, which many of the staff swore they had disposed of since they didn't have a need for it. Believe it or not, since then, they have disposed of at least 5 Class of 3000 episodes, which was one of my pet peeves with them. The tape had a sticker on it which said the title in sloppy handwriting with what I believe was a Sharpie marker. I looked behind me. Everyone else was on lunch break, but just in case someone came in, I closed the door and put up the sign, "Please knock," as many interns and staff do when there are people touring the studios. I then put the tape in the TV, or the VCR. There was static for a few seconds, but the episode appeared. Regular show. You. That's odd. They showed the title 3 times. I thought it must have been a glitch or an error in the tape and continued watching. The episode opened up typically with Mordecai and Rigby playing video games. Another odd thing happened. Mordecai was quite clearly mouthing words, but nothing came out. The remote must have been 3 feet away from me, so I knew I didn't hit the mute button. I found this confusing. It cut to the next scene where Rigby was jamming out to a song, the exact same song I had at the time as my cell phone ringtone. I figured it was just an odd coincidence, and continued on. Rigby began to speak with Mordecai's voice. "Dude, this song is awesome," he said. As he said that, I began to think that this episode was very oddly similar to This Is My Jam, an earlier regular show episode. Mordecai remained speechless. The screen turned black and began to the opening again. Regular show. You. Odd. It did it only once this time, and excluded everything else normally featured in the 4 frames of the opening. The scene continued where it left off, but it looked oddly like Mordecai was in anime style, and also wearing the wig featured in Benson Be Gone when he turns into Susan like the rest of the brainwashed cast. Rigby then said, still in Mordecai's voice, "Coffee?" which was very out of term and awkward. Mordecai appears again, this time with a square head in CGI style. Just then another intern burst in. "What are you watching? Can you not read? The sign says please knock. Lunch break's over, man, and I really needed to come in." Lunch break's over? I was surprised that it was already over, considering it felt like it had only been 10 minutes or so. "I thought we burned that tape, man," he said. "They said they disposed of it," I said, "but then I just found it." "Alright, man, I have to watch this," he said, sitting down in a chair and watching. The screen turned green as soon as he got in the chair, which I figured was another odd coincidence. Then it began to play the song he had as his cell phone ringtone. Very odd coincidence. The screen began to fade into Rigby, burying something. He appeared to be in a graveyard. We finally got a shot of a tomb, which I was afraid meant Mordecai was dead. Then when Rigby opened it, the screen turned green again. The very scene began to loop over and over again for about 6.5 minutes, until the screen turned into just a shot of Mordecai, appearing to be staring into the camera wide-eyed, looking displeased. He was behind the graveyard, but no Rigby was in sight. The screen turned red this time. Thought it appeared to be splattered on in a cheesy special effects way. I assumed it to be a creepy effect trying to look gory. Then this appeared. Regular show. Dawn. It looked normal, considering it was an actual episode minus the fact that it was missing 2 or 4 frames like the last one. To my surprise, the shot continued to appear again for approximately 1 minute and 47 seconds. Then it began to play an odd song in an odd voice that sounded like a voice disguiser voice. My boy, my boy, my boy from the heavens, can I tell you about the wreckings? I only ask for you, only you, not him. You see, Tom, it's a very funny story. I gasped. The name of the intern next to me was Tom. Does that mean it wanted him? The tape ended then, oddly. I stared at the blank screen for a few seconds, then went back to look at Tom. He was gone. I then attempted to replay the tape, but it ejected every time I hit play. I then hit eject, in which as soon as the tape came out, the tape roll started coming out of it. I was never able to watch it again. To this day, Tom remains missing too. The police thought I was lying when I told them about the events, because I had no proof. They said they'd work on it. Typical cop. It's only been about 2 months as of the time of this writing, but I haven't received any kind of notice they are trying to find him. I was only given a warning for viewing the tape by Stuart Snyder himself, who said I should never go up digging for things. Maybe he's right. Maybe I shouldn't have.
Well, that does it for this year's batch of spooky stories. Thanks for listening. If you're craving more spoop, be sure to check out last year's Creepypasta show. But if you've had enough for one night, check out any of our other episodes. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, keep up with us on Facebook and Twitter, and, oh yeah, happy Halloween.